So I've been thinking about individualism. Hi, my name is Konstantin and this is the Konstadrome. If you're new to the channel, click that subscribe button so that you never miss a new video. So I've been thinking about individualism, and solipsism, and collectivism, and... Just pick one and talk about it already. What I mean by individualism is the idea that wants, needs, and desires of an individual should come before those of a group. People who are individualistic most of the time value self-reliance and independence. And the opposite of individualism happens to be collectivism, where the needs, wants, and desires of a group take precedent over those of an individual. Now you might be saying, individualism, isn't that when you do whatever it takes to get to the top? Like that time when you were 2 and your mom introduced you to Timmy, and it didn't take you long to realize that Timmy was just a pushover. So when you were in high school, you said, why bother with all this homework when I can just copy it from Timmy? And when you both got into the same college, you said, why bother writing all these papers when I can just ask Timmy for help, pretend that I'm doing something while he writes everything that I need? And when you both got into the same law firm and were gunning for the same position to become a partner, for the first time in his life, for the first time Timmy asked you to help him out on a presentation that he was presenting, and he gave you a bunch of files and you said, of course you will help him out. But you didn't do anything. You took the files because you know better. You know that your goals are more important than his. You know that you come before him. So when he got up there to present, he got nothing, and so he got fired. And you got to be the one to climb to the top, because in order to get to the top, you know that you need to crush your friends and crush your enemies. So there you are, on floor 73, with a great view. You are individualism incarnate. You have achieved absolutely everything you have ever wanted. But have you also lost friends in the process? Actually, studies show that being individualistic in an individualistic country doesn't actually make you lose friends and has no effect on your social life. Now, we could talk about individualism without talking about solipsism. Oh man, that was weird. I don't know, try again. Okay. Now, we could talk about individualism without talking about solipsism. Oh man, this is weird. I don't know what's going on. Can you do this? Yeah. Now we could talk about individualism without talking about solipsism. My. He thought that he was gonna talk about solipsism. You know, the idea that the only thing that you can be sure of that exists is your own mind. Like if you're looking at a Welcome to Las Vegas sign, you can be sure that that sign exists. But while you're looking at that sign, you cannot be sure if Welcome to Texas or any other sign, or anything for that matter, exists. We can thank René Descartes for this, who said, I think, therefore I am. And hold that thought while I get a mirror so I can keep an eye on that guy who thinks that his mind is the only one that exists. You see, the problem with that is thinking, or I think. The idea that every single individual is the only one who is responsible for generating and thinking of his own thoughts. And I know what you might be saying. You might be saying, Konstantin, I am the master of my own thoughts. And you might be right. But what if I told you, don't think of a red apple? Now don't think of a white snowman. Now, if we have thought about any of those two things, it might mean that we might not be the only ones who are in control of our thoughts. We might not be the only ones who think of our thoughts. It could be that our environments and other people might generate the thoughts that we have in our heads. Now, the reason we're talking about this is because it's important to know where our thoughts are coming from and who and what might be potentially influencing them. You son of... While it is important to know where our thoughts are coming from, one other reason we touched on solipsism is because it's sort of similar to individualism. If we do believe in solipsism and we believe that our mind is the only thing that we can be sure of that exists, then that means that the only person that exists is us. And if that's the case, then why don't we just act in the best interest of the person that we can be sure of that exists? Ourselves. Now, does that sound like something we talked about? That's right. Individualism. Now keep in mind that René Descartes came up with a lot of his theories through his method of doubt, where he doubted absolutely everything. And while René Descartes gave us such things as cogito ergo sum, or I think, therefore I am, he also said that animals are robots and do not feel pain. So maybe like Descartes, you should also doubt everything, or if not everything, then at least something or things that do sound a little bit dubious. Now you might be saying, yeah, but what about individualism? And more importantly, what's up with him? Oh, him. Yeah, he's being punished. The reason we're talking about individualism is because it's important as a concept, but also because it's relevant in the context of the pandemic that we're currently having. While a lot of times our individualistic actions can be regarded as selfish, it is worth noting that sometimes being individualistic can actually help a lot of people. In other words, being individualistic can actually have a collectivist result. And if that's a little bit confusing, don't worry about it, we'll get back to it in just a little bit. Remember that time when he said something about individualistic countries? Actually, studies show that being individualistic in an individualistic country doesn't actually make you lose friends and has no effect on your social life. Well, let's talk about that. While countries can be divided into very many different things, they can also be divided into individualistic and collectivist societies. And an example of a few individualistic societies could be the United States, Canada, Australia, and yes, Lithuania. And an example of a few collectivist societies could be India, China, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and Mexico. Okay, now you can sit down. It is important to note, though, that just because somebody was born into an individualistic or a collectivist society does not mean that that person will necessarily become an individualist or collectivist. Even though more and more countries are moving towards individualism, it is important to understand that collectivism never really goes away. In fact, even countries who have been founded on and always have been individualistic still sometimes go back or revert to collectivism in the times of great need. And I know what you might be saying. I know, you might be saying, Konstantin, why even bother with collectivism? I am independent, I am self-sustaining. If I do well, then I praise myself. If I fail, then I blame myself. Is that such a bad way to live? Well, no, of course not. I'm not saying that you should change your lifestyle, or I'm not saying that you shouldn't be individualistic. What I am saying is that it's important to understand why collectivism is important so that we can adapt and use it to our advantage to live better lives overall. You see, in 1954, Mazafer Sheriff decided to do a study that he called the Robbers Cave Experiment.
Oh, like that game we used to play in Boy Scouts.
What game?
Robbers and Caves.
You mean Cops and Robbers?
No. Robbers and Caves. It's where you divide into two groups, and one group is robbers and one group is caves. And then the robbers try to enter the caves, and the caves have two entrances, you know, the back entrance and the front entrance, and then you kind of like, you go hide and you try to... Wait a minute.
Come here, tell me what happened. Oh my. Oh no. Well, in 1954, Mazafer Sharif did the Robbers Cave Experiment. Now, the goal of the experiment was pretty simple, to see what would spark conflict between groups and what could potentially extinguish it. Now, the setup of this experiment was pretty simple. It was to take place on a summer camp, and the participants would be 12-year-old boys. Now, the boys themselves didn't really know that they were participating in this experiment, however, their parents did. Now, before the boys got to the camp, they were separated into 2 different groups, and each group arrived to the campgrounds at different times. And when they got there, they had no knowledge of another group existing. At first, researchers just observed how the boys were adapting to their own groups and how they were establishing their hierarchies and naming their troops. And then after a while, they told them that there was another group on the premises and that they would hold competitions to see who would do better at various activities like tug of war and baseball. You see, the catch here that the winners would get great prizes including trophies and the losers would get, well, nothing. As you might have guessed, before long, rivalry ensued between the 2 groups, and they started name-calling each other, and when it reached a really high point, one of the groups actually stole the flag of another group and burned it. Now you might be saying, who even gave those people a job? I could have told you that this is what would have happened, and I don't even have a psychology degree. And you are probably right. However, what we're looking here at is not exactly what sparked this conflict, but what exactly extinguished it. You see, when the conflict reached its peak, researchers decided that it was time to try and extinguish the conflict. Now, they have tried many things and a lot of them really didn't work. At first, they decided that it would be a good idea to try and unite the boys over food. And one time, one group got there before the other, and instead of waiting, they just ate all the food, and when the other group got there, they just ended up fighting each other. Another time, they got there at the same time, and instead of eating, they just got into a big food fight. So after a while, researchers decided that the best thing to do was to just unite them over a common goal that was threatening both of them and that they could work together to do that. So researchers cut the water supply and told them that in order to fix that, they would have to bond together and try to go through this crisis as a team. The result was exactly as the researchers predicted. By working together to achieve a common goal, the conflict between the 2 groups was completely extinguished, and in the end, boys went from a giant rivalry to actually becoming friends. And before you say anything, no. The moral isn't that friendship is power. I do understand that not all of us are 12-year-old boys and that our crises are much, much heavier. However, the reason we're talking about this is because it's a great illustration of how something that threatens everyone can bring people together, and how now, maybe more than ever, we should consider becoming more collectivist, at least even for a little while, and not friends, but just collectivist. Now let me explain. The problem might not even be in the fact that we aren't collectivist. The problem might be that we are individualistic or collectivist in small groups, fighting each other instead of fighting something that might actually be the focus. Remember how we talked about other people being able to influence our thoughts? Well, this is somewhat similar. Just like other people can influence our thoughts, our environments, and also other people can influence whether we become individualistic or collectivist. Even though being born into an individualistic country will not necessarily make you an individualist, the chances of becoming one are much greater. And depending on the country that we are born into and the values that we acquire along the way, our individualistic perspective may also differ greatly.
No.
Let's take United States as an example. Being a country with many people from different backgrounds, we are bound to have many different individualistic outlooks. And that's fine, diversity is great. The problem isn't that we have many people with different individualistic outlooks, but rather how we look at people with different individualistic outlooks. One of the reasons for this rivalry and how we look at people might be because we make the error of, what was it again?
Oh, you don't know.
What am I studying to be, a psychologist or something?
Oh, well, you were studying to be a psychologist, but then you decided
Oh, look who's
to quit
talking,
and
mister. I
do
want to play
whatever
video
the
games
hell
and we'll
this
go
is,
to
what,
parties
sit in
and
front of a
join the
camera all
frat.
day
The only reason you
and
went to
have
college in the
friends, like
first
you're
place is just so you could do
reaching
all those
somebody,
things
like
and just
you're
not worry about it for like 4
people's
years.
minds and stuff like that. Oh, don't kid yourself.
Why don't you say that again?
It's fundamental attribution error.
Thank you. Now, was that so hard? In the simplest terms, the fundamental attribution error happens when people assume that what a person does is based on what kind of person he is, instead of on the social and environmental circumstances that he might be in. For example, if you say hi to someone and they reply with something like, "Yeah," you might think that that person is rude, when in reality something terrible might have happened in his life and he's just not feeling in the best of moods. If people recognize that they might be making the fundamental attribution error, then we might be a lot less divided. However, the main reason we're still so divided and attacking each other instead of something that is an actual threat is because we fail to recognize that there is a threat that is actually larger than any given person or a group. Countries and people are no strangers to coming together and pausing or even sacrificing parts of their individualism so that everyone can maintain most of their individualism in the future. And a couple of examples of that would be the bubonic plague, the Spanish flu, and even 9/11. Now look, I'm not telling anyone how to live, nor am I saying that people should abandon their beliefs. But think about it for a second. If all of us remain individualistic, demanding the independence to do whatever it is that we want, then it is a very big possibility that a lot of us might actually lose the most important thing that there is: life itself. Remember how we talked about individualistic actions having collectivist results? Well, let's suppose a person is truly individualistic to the core. Let's suppose that this person only makes decisions that benefit him. Then it would make sense that for such a person's survival would be at the top of the list. Which means that by acting in an individualistic fashion, this person not only helps himself but also those around him, or, well, the lack of those around him. Which in turn happens to be a collectivist result, because sometimes coming together simply means staying apart. If you take anything from this video, I hope that it's the fact that sometimes our thoughts might not be our own, and that sometimes when we think that we're acting in an individualistic fashion guided by our own thoughts, we might actually be acting in a collectivist fashion under the guidance of someone else's thoughts. And you know what they say, that the first step to solving any problem is recognizing that there is one. Now take that as you will, but remember that the only thing worse than a missed opportunity is the inability to have opportunities in the future. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Konstantin, and I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me in my drome. This is the third video in the series, and if you like this one, please check out the other two. They're pretty good. Consider subscribing if you like the content, and share this video if you'd like to help me out. And if you would like to talk to me or have any suggestions or would like me to cover a specific topic, you can do that in the comments. I'm always in the comments. And as always, what's happening in your drone? What are you thinking? Well, that's it for now, and I will see you in the next one. So what researchers did is or environmental circumstances that the reason we're talking about individualism is because I didn't turn my audio recorder. Here we go.